Hello, everybody. Welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed, the television edition. And whether you're watching us on MPTS or streaming us on IPMNation.com, it is great to have you with us. And we have a great guest with us today making a return appearance to the show. We have with us Kirk McNeil of Rothbard, Sterner and Dobbs, a lobbying firm, although it sounds like a law firm.
It does sound a little bit like a law firm.
Does anyone ever call you and ask you for legal advice, Kirk?
We're lucky to get anybody to call us at all.
And you were on before, what was it, about 2 months ago?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
The time gets away from me.
It was before it got cold. I know
All
that
right,
much.
that was definitely a couple months ago then. Well, for those who are seeing you on the show for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about the lobbying firm?
Sure. Well, my business partner and I started this lobbying firm up because we were in Concord all the time anyway, working on pet projects and trying to help either pass or kill bills. And really, the only way to monetize that or to get remunerated in any way for your time is to sign up as lobbyists. Mm-hmm. So we created a lobbying firm, sort of to do what we were doing anyway. And what Rothbard, Sterner and Dobbs does is we try to take on bills, issues, clients who are interested, particularly in promoting liberty, loosening up the government restrictions on small businesses, particularly so that they can get on with the business of being small businesses.
Sure. How long has this existed, this lobbying firm?
A couple years now.
A couple years, okay.
Yep.
And were you active in politics or working on these issues prior to that?
Oh, yeah, for about 5 years now.
Okay.
I'd say.
So how were you doing that? How were you approaching that prior to the lobbying firm?
Well, I'm also the executive director of New Hampshire Common Sense.
Okay.
And
I don't think we talked about that the last time you were here.
Okay. Well, so I'm also the executive director of NH Common Sense, which has been trying to reform New Hampshire's primarily medical marijuana laws, but the marijuana laws here in New Hampshire, and working on various other things as well. And my business partner Kevin Bloom, we call him Johnny Beerseed because he's been very involved in changing a lot of the nanobrewery legislation, and really it's created sort of a boom in the nanobrewing industry here in New Hampshire. Okay. I think there's close to, I think it might be 12 now new breweries that have opened up in New Hampshire just over the past maybe 18 months or so.
No kidding. Okay.
So, yeah, it's a
little.
It's a nano boom in a nano industry.
Yeah,
so.
Johnny Beerseed. I thought you were going to tell me he was a pirate or something.
He dresses up as a pirate sometimes, but that's just for costume parties, as far as I know.
Okay. So, let's talk about the marijuana issue because that's a hot topic right now.
Sure.
And where are we with that? I mean, it passed the New Hampshire State Legislature, correct?
Sure.
Passed the House.
Well, actually, let's back up just a little bit before that. So, medical passed last year, and the governor signed the medical marijuana bill into law. That particular law has a few flaws with it in that, we're still in a place here, roughly 6 months after the passage of the law. No one even knows what the rules are yet because the committee doesn't have to be finished with those until this coming summer. So no one's got a card. No one knows the rules. Applications, there's not even an application process really yet for opening up a dispensary.
I didn't even realize that it had passed. I thought, so Lynch signed that into law?
No, Maggie did.
Oh, she did. Okay, because Lynch tried to kill. Lynch vetoed it, right?
Yes, we actually started using the expression that he lynched the bill.
Yeah.
Over and over again. So.
And his wife is a doctor.
That's true. Yeah.
Doesn't that frustrate you?
It frustrates me a lot, or it frustrated me a lot, I should say.
Yeah.
So, and there a lot of times when you're doing politics, you try to figure out what people's motives are.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just baffle you.
How anyone opposes medical marijuana is baffling to me.
I think the only people I know of who truly oppose medical marijuana and oppose it vehemently and consistently are people who either don't know or don't understand the science, or people whose bread is seriously buttered on the side of enforcing drug laws. And I'm not trying to cast dispersions on either one of those groups because obviously, if you're ignorant of the science, you can remedy that.
Right.
If you're willfully ignorant of the science, that's a different matter. But anyone can learn science; it's not that hard. and it's not rocket surgery. And I understand. I might not agree with somebody whose bread is buttered on the side of keeping marijuana illegal, or particularly keeping medical marijuana illegal, but but I understand. If that's what writes your paycheck, if that's where you're coming from,
right?
Well, I don't like it, but I get it. I do get it.
Right. What infuriates me about the whole thing is it's like how little compassion and empathy does a person have to look at someone who is, say, suffering from a terminal illness and is just
right. Well, and the thing that we heard over and over and over again in hearings was there are other options. Sure, there are other options for painfully sick and dying people. But really, if you're in that position, don't you want whatever the best option for you, your doctor, your life might
exactly.
be? And, you see these patients who are prescribed opiates for pain, and what it does is it puts them in a situation where, yes, they have a treatment for the pain that just makes them feel, disconnected and sleepy and unable to spend, sometimes the last weeks and months of their life actually interacting, communicating with their friends and family.
Yeah.
Or they could use something like marijuana and actually still have pain relief and be able to have a life at the same time.
Exactly. We have a caller. We'll grab this. Hi, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. Who's on the line? Hello? Should be there. Your time to shine. I think it was the Phantom.
It might be. It might be.
Anyway, so yeah, I just my attitude about it is, I mean, just as a compassionate, empathetic person, it's like I really look at it in very, very simple terms. If someone is suffering, if someone is dying, whatever it is they're going through medically, and they want to get high, let them get high. To me, it really is that simple. Who's getting hurt? Nobody's getting hurt. Nobody's being harmed.
It's true. And we used to hear a lot of, well, it sends the wrong message to children, or, what happens if, little Tommy gets into, grandma's weed stash or something like that. And, I would just say, well, certainly we don't want little Tommy to get into grandma's weed stash, partly because his brain isn't fully developed and it's probably not the right choice.
Right.
Partly because it's grandma's weed stash. It's not Tommy's weed stash.
Right.
And but at the same time, if he's going to get into her medication, I'd rather him get into her weed than her oxycodone.
Yes.
Or quite frankly, the Tylenol. Tylenol is much more lethal than marijuana.
Yeah.
I forget exactly the dosage, but you can basically fry your liver on less than a bottle of Tylenol.
I've read that.
It would take about 1,500 pounds of marijuana consumed in a 24-hour period to actually kill you. And then, you think about consuming 1,500 pounds of marijuana in a 24-hour period. Really, what it would have to do is fall on you.
Right. Yeah, no one's ever died from marijuana. All right, we have a caller on hold. We'll try this again. Hi, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. Who's on the line? Hello? All right.
He was almost there that time. He said he kept hitting the thing. Maybe that means he's misdialing us, but...
yeah, I don't know. All right, so Hassan signed medical marijuana in
Hassan
July.
signed medical marijuana, so we have that. It's still in the process of being worked out exactly how it's going to, be available and everything, but it is out there.
Yeah.
So, now...
This is our caller again, John Cena.
Okay.
We'll try one more time. Hi, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. Who's on the line?
Hey, Matt. How you doing?
Hey, Norm.
Hey, I have a question for your guest, if I may.
Yes.
Your guest, first of all, I'm glad that he's in favor of the medical marijuana. Mm-hmm. Are you there?
Yep, right here.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you could hear me. But he's also a lobbyist, am I correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Now, do you go out to the highest bidder of any bill that might be formed, and somebody comes up to you and they say that they want to pass a certain bill, they want you to lobby for it, and or somebody else might be opposed to the bill, but yet you go out to the highest bidder, and whoever will pay you the most money, like they do in Washington.
I tell you what, there are times that I wish that was the case, but really what happens is that my partner and I look at laws that we think need to be passed or laws that we think don't need to be passed, and then we do what we're going to do anyway, which is try to get behind those things, and then really being called a lobbyist is just the way that we can legitimately get paid for doing that. So rather than getting paid by the highest bidder, usually what happens is we say, oh, goodness gracious, this law really does need to pass. Does anybody want to help support our efforts to do that?
Right.
For instance, there's a poker bill right now that we're trying to get passed, and all it does is say that poker should be defined as a game of skill rather than a game of chance, which is mathematically verifiable.
I really do appreciate you answering that question. I wasn't trying to be facetious.
No.
It's see like it all the time in Washington and all that. And I want to thank you for your uncandid answer and your honesty. And I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Norm. I'll see you at 4.
All righty.
All right.
And just to kind of finish that thought, so we introduced the poker bill, where we had a representative friend of ours that were talking to about it. He introduced the poker bill. It just says that poker is a game of skill, not a game of chance, which under the New Hampshire gambling statutes would also make it legal for anybody to play poker whenever and wherever they wanted to.
Sure.
But people are free to amend that part of the law any way they want to.
Yeah.
We just looked at it and we said it is a game of skill, and one of the problems that we have with our legislative process today is there's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, you can talk about marijuana being a Schedule I drug. You can talk about poker being listed as a game of chance. If the law is incorrect, scientifically, factually, mathematically incorrect, but we hang on to it, then what it really does is tell people the law doesn't really matter. The law doesn't represent the truth or the way life actually exists. The law simply represents the way somebody who wrote it down wants the world to be.
Right.
But if the world is not thus, then why should we obey the laws? So if you want people to
said,
follow the law and you want people to live in a nation of laws, then it's very important, both philosophically and practically, to have laws that are correct.
Right. And we talked about this last time, too. Obviously, poker's a game of skill. Otherwise, you wouldn't have things like poker tournaments. You wouldn't have people who are very good at it and people who are very bad at it. So obviously, there's skill involved. So now with marijuana now, let me ask you this. Are you in favor of, obviously you're in favor of full legalization, I assume, not just decriminalization? Or
you know what? Here's the way I feel about it. Another verifiable truth is that used in moderation, alcohol is certainly no more harmful and possibly less harmful than alcohol is to people.
Right.
And it's also fairly well documented that people throughout history like to alter their state of consciousness from time to time. Now, obviously, some people go overboard in doing this and they take it too far.
Sure.
But then again, some people drive too fast and some people, make bad decisions when it comes to how much, soda pop and hamburgers they are going to consume.
Right.
But so when you have a substance that is reasonably benign and people enjoy using it, and according to the latest polls that I've seen, approximately 60% of the people in New Hampshire favor it being either decriminalized or legalized, then once again, I think you find yourself in that sort of position where you have to say, well, why is this illegal?
Right.
And why is it penalized the way it is? And then you come around to looking at the New Hampshire Constitution, and Article 18 of the New Hampshire Constitution, I'm going to paraphrase it here, essentially says that the punishment should fit the crime. Well, right now, if I have a single joint of marijuana, I don't even have to smoke it. I don't have to consume it. I don't have to sell it to anybody. If I just possess that single joint of marijuana, the penalty for me possessing that joint is the same as the penalty if I were to get up from my chair and punch you in the face right now. I don't think that these two things are equivalent.
Right.
In one instance, I'm holding a plant, not even becoming intoxicated by it, and in the other instance, I'm committing an act of aggression against somebody who has done nothing to provoke it whatsoever.
Right.
So under Article 18, either we need to dramatically increase the penalty for simple assault, or we need to dramatically decrease the penalty for marijuana. Again, the facts and the law need to come together, and that's what we're all about. So do I support decriminalization or legalization? The answer would be yes. Is there a particular form that I think that should take?
Well, you'd prefer legalization, though, right?
I don't really care.
It doesn't matter to you?
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. Do you support the idea of the government getting involved and taxing it and whatnot? Or would you rather see, because I notice a lot of folks who support legalization, they like the idea of the government regulating it, kind of like with alcohol. You know, we have state liquor stores, for example, in New Hampshire. Maybe we have, maybe we regulate marijuana the same way and taxing it. Because I personally, while I see the validity in that and I see the potential revenue source and all that, I'd rather see the government out of it completely. I'd rather see the government legalize it and then hands off, because
I think, one way to look at it would be to treat it sort of the same way we treat tomatoes. If I grow tomatoes in my own backyard and I consume them on my own property, then it's my business.
Right.
If I sell a tomato either in a restaurant or a grocery store, then the government comes into play, because there might be a rooms and meals tax applied to it, or there might be some food handling regulations that apply to it, or some licensing requirements, for my store or my restaurant or whatever like that that come into play, because I'm serving the public in a public capacity. And that's sort of the way I see the decriminalization, legalization argument. I don't see why this should be different from the way that we handle anything else. If I raise rabbits in my backyard and I choose to kill and eat the rabbits, then that's not the business of the government, how I do that. However, if I decide to sell you a nice, gosh, I haven't been to a French restaurant in a long time, but I know that you can get a lovely rabbit with, nice cream sauce and all that kind of stuff. If I'm going to serve you that in my place of business, well, now I come under licensing and regulatory requirements.
Sure.
I mean, the same is true with beer. I can homebrew beer, and it's nobody's business but mine.
Right.
But the minute I want to sell it to somebody, or the minute I want to, offer it in a bar or at a sporting event or something like that, now I come under regulations.
Yeah. So you don't have an objection to the government necessarily taxing it and all that, as long as we can get past the throwing people in prison for...
Yeah, I would say as long as it's not an onerous or prohibitive tax, I would say that the businesses that want to engage in that practice have sort of stepped into that public arena where they have acknowledged that there's a certain amount of government authority. It's not like somebody's going to make you go into the pot shop business or make you go into the business of selling tomatoes or carrots or anything else. You're going to choose to go into that business and choose to serve the public.
Yeah.
Therefore, you have to deal to a certain extent with, the representatives of the public, which becomes our government regulatory agencies. But that's a voluntary choice you make. So.
What are the roadblocks to this in New Hampshire? Because I know that in some states, and Eileen Landes was on with me last week, and we were talking about this too, about how I know that, and I don't know what the situation is in New Hampshire as far as prisons. I know that in states where there are private prisons, the private prison corporations actively lobby in those states, those state governments, to keep marijuana illegal because
because it's a growth industry then,
right?
Well, there are a lot of obstacles. I think again, one of the big obstacles is what is our paradigm of somebody who smokes weed. A lot of us, when we think of that, we think of Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Jeff Spicoli, or we think of the Hollywood portrayal of what that
Cheech
looks
and
like.
Chong and
Exactly. And some of us probably remember college days where, certainly the way that people consume, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, or marijuana, during their those college age years, is not necessarily the way that they will or should be consuming those substances for the rest of their lives. So I think you have to get over that paradigm first. I was talking to somebody recently, and he said, well, I don't know any responsible potheads. And I said, well, A, you probably do.
Right.
And B, why in the world would they ever tell you?
Right, exactly.
Why would they say, I'm committing an illegal act, Mr. Guy who thinks it's wrong?
Yeah,
know?
Right.
But
I'm sure the gentleman who said this to you is very comfortable in his narrow sort of tunnel vision worldview.
Sure. And, and there's a certain amount of that, whether you're talking about, you think about a lot of the social issues of our day, right?
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of stuff that yes, please, feel free to do that thing that you like to do. I don't necessarily want to watch you do it.
Right.
Or smell you do it, or hear about you doing it. So we have a certain amount of, I think we're at a point in our society right now where we need to find this balancing act between what I would describe as freedom and courtesy. And, I think it's going to be a seesaw for a little bit, because for a long time, people's rights to behave the way they want to behave, as long as it doesn't harm anybody else, have been stepped on to a point that when the seesaw swings back the other way, a lot of them feel like, you could see Denver, on New Year's night. Evidently, there were just clouds of smoke in the air because everybody who wanted to smoke in public for the longest time decided tonight's the night to smoke in public.
Right.
Well, I get it. I get why that's a celebration.
Sure.
But that's also not necessarily the courteous way to behave
right
over the long term.
Right. They didn't do themselves any favors necessarily.
Right, exactly.
The governor there is already mad. And,
right. So we need to have I'm a big advocate of, of people being polite.
Yeah.
Say please. Say thank you.
Right.
Don't blow your smoke in my face.
Right.
By the same token, let me do what I want to do with my own body as long as I'm not hurting anybody else.
I think a lot of people, too, who are uptight about legalization, I think they really legitimately have this idea in their heads that the moment we legalize it, that everybody's going to be walking around stoned. And like what you saw in Denver on New Year's Eve, that'll be, a lot of them probably assume that that's how it is now in Denver every day.
Right.
And it's bizarre. It's just because, first of all, I don't think it being illegal stops anyone from doing it who wants to do it. They just have to be more careful about it, or they get caught and they get thrown in prison because the government deems that they're now a dangerous criminal. But I also don't think that it suddenly being legal is going to compel anyone to do it who didn't prior have any interest in doing it.
Yeah.
Why would it?
I suppose there might be some small percentage of the population that was afraid to do it beforehand and is now going to say, I think I might want to try that. But I also think there's probably a percentage of the population, and this is actually verifiable, especially among teens. When medical becomes legal in states, teen use actually drops.
Does it?
Because grandma's medicine isn't cool.
Oh, okay.
So there's going to be a little bit of a push-pull, and I think that, whether you look at New Hampshire or any other state, there's going to be that seesaw effect. We're going to have to find our level. And anyone out there who is an advocate for marijuana, whether medical or recreational or tax and legislate or tax and regulate or just decriminalization, needs to recognize that if and when they get what they want, the more courteous they are, the more likely they are to keep what they want.
Right.
And by the same token, the less draconian we are on the front end, the more courteous people are likely to be on the back end.
Right. Right. And the prohibition doesn't work.
It doesn't work. We wouldn't have had Al Capone if we hadn't had alcohol prohibition.
Right. Is part of this too, part of why, because there's such an inconsistency in logic. You mentioned alcohol. The government, as far as the government's concerned, you can drink yourself into a coma, as long as you don't drive a car, but if you want to, but again, if you use marijuana, you're a criminal. Also the tobacco industry too. Obviously cigarettes will kill you, and no one's ever died from marijuana. But with that, you have basically with the subsidies that the government doles out to the tobacco industry, you have a situation here where, well, cigarettes are probably, I mean, probably even more harmful than alcohol, definitely more harmful than marijuana could ever be. But if the government, if the government is an active partner in that industry, and I think a lot of people miss that side of it too.
Well, and that's one of the things that is a warning flag for me. And we could talk about anything in terms of vice. When the government becomes an active partner in what a lot of us think of as the vice industries, whether that's, I mean, that could be prostitution out in Nevada. And I'm not advocating that we change that law here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
At least no one's thought that one through and brought it to my attention yet.
Right.
But anyway. But anytime you get government involved in profiting from vices, then it creates a very interesting dichotomy where, we need to tax cigarettes. Okay, how much of your budget is now based on people continuing to smoke? And how does that really work?
Right.
I mean, we do some interesting things with our state liquor stores here, and I guess we're promoting a specific brand of vodka now, Old Man and the Mountain Vodka.
I didn't know that, really.
Oh, yeah. There's actually some interesting memes floating around the internet with the governor promoting Old Man and the Mountain Vodka, but then the quote that she made about how legalizing cannabis would send the wrong message to children.
Right.
Well,
I
suppose that maybe kids don't watch press conferences, so it's not really sending the wrong message to them.
I always thought it's interesting that we have state liquor stores on the highway,
sure.
Don't drink and drive, but on 93.
Which is exactly that dichotomy.
Yeah.
Why do we have them on the highway? Because people drive up to their vacation homes, and that's a high traffic point. And certainly all our friends in Massachusetts who are heading up 93, past those hooks at exits, they're going to stop before they get to the lake and purchase liquor from the liquor store, and they're going to enjoy their time at the lake, and they're going to spend some time up in the Whites or whatever like that, and spend tourist money that the state needs and wants, and certainly everyone wants to have a good time, and the state profits from that. On the other hand, here we are on the highway selling a substance that you're not supposed to use on the highway. And while I'm sure that 95% of these people leave the cap on the bottle until they get where they're going, you're right. It's a weird dichotomy to put out there. It's strange. Of course, people are strange.
Right.
It's one of the fun things about being alive is watching people do weird shit.
Sometimes you just got to really appreciate irony.
Yeah. So
how are you discouraged with because regardless of what happens legislatively, Hassan has said she's going to veto this, right?
Well, okay, so I'm not discouraged at all because, as late as early last week, everyone was saying that HB 492 was dead in the water. One of my friends called it deader than Elvis.
Yeah.
And what do you know? It passed the House and went on to the Ways and Means Committee. Now, it squeaked through the House, to be sure. Whether or not it's going to pass this year, I think, is still up in the air. I think that having that close a vote changed a lot of people's minds about whether or not this thing could get through. I'm trying to think how best to put this. It bothers me, and Governor Hassan is not the first person to do this. Governor Lynch did it over and over and over again, not just about marijuana law, but about a lot of different laws. A law starts coming down the pipe, and the governor will say, I don't like that law, I'm going to veto it. Well, certainly, they're the governor, they're allowed to do that. But then there are a lot of state reps and state senators who say, why should we even fool with this thing? The governor's going to veto it. And that becomes problematic because then the bill doesn't get the debate that it should get. Because the debate, in my mind, and I know I'm being a little idealistic here, but that's why I do a law firm that doesn't sell out to the highest, or a lobbyist firm that doesn't sell out to the highest bidder, right?
Right.
Is because I am a little bit idealistic. Then we run into a situation where instead of the legislature debating the bill on the merits of the bill and whether or not they, as representatives of the people of New Hampshire, should or should not vote for it. They begin saying, why are we spending time on this? The governor's going to veto it.
Okay, yeah.
So it puts a chill on the bill.
Right.
Well, when the chill's on the bill and it still passes the House, now I start to wonder, what's going on? Maybe we can get this through.
Yeah.
Maybe it happens. Maybe if the governor doesn't want this bill to become law, she's the one who needs to put the kibosh on it, and she's the one who needs to say, I, the governor, veto this bill, instead of just sticking it in the fridge.
That makes sense, and it's
down in
on
the
her.
legislature.
She takes
Sure.
the hit for it because public opinion is in favor generally
Right.
of
Well,
some,
and to be fair, maybe she takes the hit for it, or maybe she reaps the benefit of it.
Yeah.
If she really believes that her constituents don't want a bill like this,
right.
then that's a benefit to be reaped.
Yeah.
And if the reverse is true, then she takes a hit on it.
Yeah.
But let's be honest about it.
Right. Right.
Let's either take the hit or reap the benefit.
Yeah.
Based on the will of the people,
Right.
not based on playing games with the bill while it's still in the legislature.
Right. Is that her main? Because I haven't heard any of her statements. I only know that she said she'd veto it. Is her main reason that she has stated because she's concerned about sending the wrong message to kids? Is that?
And that's one of them. There's a lot of, and this isn't just the governor. A lot of the reasons I've heard are that, well, Washington and Colorado have done similar things to this, but let's wait and see how that goes. Well, it's going pretty well so far.
Right.
But,
right.
But I understand the wait and see attitude. I get that. I do think it's interesting that when it comes to decriminalization, we are alone in northern New England as far as not having decriminalization. Maine has decriminalization, Vermont has decriminalization, Massachusetts has decriminalization. The biggest argument I hear from law enforcement is teen use in New Hampshire is up. Okay, so if we don't have decrim and teen use is up, and the other 3 states around us have decrim and teen use is down, hang on. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
But
it's that inertia. I mean, that's got to be the hardest.
Inertia.
That's got to be the hardest part of what you do is having to fight against the inertia, and that part of human nature that just kind of says, "Well, this is how it's always been."
Well, absolutely,
and we're comfortable with it, even if it's wrong. This is how it's always been.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. And there's certainly plenty of arguments to be made for not intoxicating yourself.
Right.
Great. But let's make those arguments and let those arguments stand and fall on their own merits, as opposed to holding penalties over people's head for doing something that at worst harms themselves.
Right.
So other arguments that we hear are, well, there's not a good test, like a good roadside test to see whether or not somebody's intoxicated with marijuana, whereas we can do a blood alcohol test and see if they're intoxicated with alcohol.
Right.
And the thing about it is there is a test. It's not probably the best test yet, but when breathalyzer tests got good is when we started putting specific amounts of alcohol that you were allowed to have in your system. So of course, corporations who built testing equipment said, oh, they need a roadside test. If we build a roadside test, police departments will buy it. So they did. To this point, there are only a very few places in the country that have asked for a roadside test for marijuana.
Okay.
So of course there's not a lot on the market yet.
Right.
That's the way the market works.
Right.
You have to give the market a place to go before it's going to go there.
Right. Because if there's money to be made, someone will
come up with a way to do it. They absolutely will.
Yeah.
One of the other things there is I ask people, well, why do you get pulled over in the first place? You get pulled over for exhibiting unsafe driving behaviors. At that point, if you're exhibiting unsafe driving behaviors, at that particular point, it doesn't matter what the reason is. You are unsafe on the road. You represent a danger to yourself and to other drivers. So, of course, a peace officer wants to get you off the road, at least to the side of the road. It really doesn't matter yet in the course of these events, whether the thing is alcohol, marijuana, your allergy medication, lack of sleep because you just worked a double shift, maybe grief. Maybe your dog died and you're crying your eyes out going down the highway coming back from the vet's office. And that could cause you to exhibit unsafe driving behaviors. Maybe you're going through a divorce or a bad breakup. That could cause you to exhibit unsafe driving behaviors. Maybe your kid in the back seat just threw their teddy bear at the rearview mirror. That could cause you to exhibit unsafe driving behaviors. So really, at that point, get the person over to the side of the road, then figure out what's going on. And the figuring out what's going on is really still based on behavior, not based on metabolites or blood or saliva or anything like that. Is the person acting like there's a problem? And if they are, how do we keep them and other drivers safe? Not, and again, I'm being idealistic here. Even then, the question shouldn't be whether or not we arrest them. The question should first be, how do we keep everybody safe? Is the way to keep everybody safe to say, ma'am, I know you just worked a double. Please pull over at this next stop. Get yourself a cup of coffee because you're not keeping it together on the road. Maybe it is, you're clearly upset, sir. Can we call somebody to come pick you up? You know, you are not able to drive right now. You're clearly in an emotional state that makes you unable to drive. You know, maybe it is, you know, maybe there is a point where somebody, this guy's, you know, drunk as a skunk and we need to get him off the road. And the way we're going to get him off the road is to put him in the back of the cruiser and take him in. Maybe that's the solution. But it's behavior, and then you get to that point. And there's not a magical behavior test, which is why hopefully we have intelligent and reasonable officers out there who have been well trained to, you know, interact with the public and to make good determinations about that sort of thing. It's not about the test. Quite frankly, if I were a law officer, I would be a little affronted that my, you know, higher ups feel like I need a test to make that determination, when really my job is to keep the peace and keep everybody safe. You know, and you don't keep somebody safe by swabbing the inside of their mouth with a Q-tip. You keep people safe by getting unsafe drivers off the road and then making sure that people have an option to get home safely.
Do you feel like having a set point of in terms of blood alcohol, like having a limit in terms of that level, do you feel like that's kind of an arbitrary number and that shouldn't necessarily...
Well, I think it's an arbitrary number, but I think it's going to be an arbitrary number. That when you put something like that into law, people are going to put a number on it. You know? And we do live in an age where we can measure these sorts of things and where we can, you know, average things and norm things and, you know, and test things to that degree. You know, I'm not opposed to that. I just wish that we'd spend a little more time and energy on what's the real problem and the real intent, which is keep people safe and make sure everybody gets home at the end of the day. And that includes the officers too, by the way. You don't want to put them in an unsafe situation. So we have to be mindful of that as well. But it's not about how many arrests can we make. You know, unless it is, but that's not what anybody's saying.
How many tickets can we write? Because that does generate revenue.
That's true. That's true. So, but really, I think it's about how do we keep everybody safe and how does everybody go home at the end of the day? And how does everybody stay, as much as possible, productive members of society? Because, you know, if you lock somebody up overnight or, you know, or for the weekend or whatever, maybe that is a way of keeping them safe, but is it the best way for them to continue paying rent and keeping their job and things like that? You know, there's that old joke about marijuana, you know, where you have the picture of the police officer sort of saying, you know, marijuana can ruin your life. So if I catch you with it, I'm going to lock you up and ruin your life. Which, you know, is sort of the, you know, again, we have that push-pull, you know, because an arrest record can keep you from getting a job or going to college and things like that.
Absolutely.
You know, and overusing substances can keep you from getting a job or going to college. You know.
What is some of the? We have a little bit of time left. What else are you guys working on in terms of lobbying?
Let's see. I am not going to try to explain all the beer bills that have to do with nanobreweries and distributors and that sort of thing.
There's obviously been some progress in that area.
There has been a lot of progress. I think the big one that's being worked on right now basically allows distributors to purchase beer from nanobreweries, because right now they kind of have to just sell it themselves in their own little location.
Sure.
And the bill would allow distributors to purchase it, and then of course they could offer it to outlets for resale.
Okay.
Because right now we have a 3-tier system where you have to be either a brewer, a distributor, or a retailer.
Okay.
So, and then there are a few exceptions there where like a nanobrewery or a brew pub can brew the beer and then also sell it on-prem, but only on-prem.
Okay.
So there is a bill with regard to that. We do have a bill out there that we're working on with regard to asset forfeiture. And all that bill really does is, right now, if you're accused of a crime and the prosecutor believes that your assets, maybe your vehicle, maybe a bank account or something like that, were involved in the commission of the crime, then those assets can be seized. Mm-hmm. The problem is
without due process.
Without due process.
Yeah.
And all this bill says is that before the assets are seized, you have to have a conviction. Mm-hmm. You know, the assets can be frozen so that they can't be used for flight, for instance.
Yeah.
But it does say that to seize the assets, you have to have a conviction.
Yeah.
It's really pretty simple. It ought to be common sense. It ought to be part of our, our judicial system and legislative system already. But again, you get the smell of money out there.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And things become a problem.
Have there been a lot of instances of abuse of that in New Hampshire that you know of?
Not a lot here in New Hampshire, not that I'm aware of.
Because I've heard, I might have brought this up last time. I haven't heard about this happening in New Hampshire specifically, but I've heard horror stories, like out west where the DEA spots a marijuana plant on somebody's property, and next thing you know, this family they might not have even known the plant was there, but it doesn't matter. Next thing you know, they're getting their home seized, and the government's taken everything, again, with no due process, no conviction, and then if they are acquitted, they don't even necessarily get everything back.
No, because you actually have to prove that whatever that was not used in the commission of a crime. So the burden of proof
it's terrible.
Gets flipped and switched to the accused, as opposed to the burden of proof being on the accuser. Yeah. And quite frankly, that's just wrong. So this is a bill to reform that and to put it back the way it should be.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, we were working on HB 675, which was the police scanners bill.
Yes.
So, and that thing went down in flames.
Yeah, the license plate readers there, yeah.
That, man, I don't understand. I understand how in a city like Boston or a city like New York, Chicago maybe, where you have so many vehicles, that it's really impossible to lay eyes on individual vehicles. I understand the appeal of something like a license plate reader.
Sure.
But quite frankly, we don't have cities anywhere approaching that size here in New Hampshire.
Right.
And then you look at cities like Boston. There was a Boston Globe article. Boston has indefinitely suspended the use of them because of security problems and abuse.
Really?
Now, and I mentioned this to several representatives that I called, before that bill came up for a vote. Mm-hmm. So when was the last time you heard the Boston Police Department say, we have an abuse problem?
Right.
I don't remember it ever happening.
Yeah.
So if they're going to go to the Globe and say, we're suspending this program for an abuse problem, they had a big abuse problem that they needed to get not just under control, but they had to kill this technology.
And they had to get out in front. I mean, obviously they were concerned enough they felt like they had to get out in front of it.
Oh, and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars putting these scanners in.
Oh, I bet.
So then there was a big push to put the scanners into New Hampshire police vehicles, and I get it. It's a cool piece of technology that scans, hundreds of cars, just boom, 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 boom.
Right.
But it's a privacy concern. It's a little bit of a Fourth Amendment concern there too, and and clearly there were some abuse issues where, when you're scanning these vehicles, the person's personal information is just popping up in front of you, and I I don't even want to get into the kinds of abuse that were alleged because it's all alleged right now.
Sure.
But if there's enough abuse, well,
yeah,
it's hard not to use a tool that you've been given. Let's put it this way.
Right.
If somebody, you probably remember
It's
this
like
from
being
high
given
school.
a new toy.
If you have a pair of drumsticks in your hand,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? You're going to beat the desk. You're going to,
Right.
Even if I had 2 pencils in my hand when I was in high school and I'm walking down the hallway, I had to drum on the lockers or something like that.
Yeah.
If you have a tool in your hand, you just want to use that tool.
Oh yeah.
If you got a hammer, you
Especially if you're a dude and it's technology, it's like a cool new gadget. Of course you want to use it.
What can this thing do? How far can I zoom in with this camera?
Right.
What can I,
Yeah.
we want to play with our toys.
Yeah.
So the particular problem with this toy is that we were going to spend, a lot of money on putting toys with a propensity for abuse into, all of these police vehicles, when cities larger than, New Hampshire's biggest city were busy suspending the program.
Yeah.
Talk about wait and see. This seems like a good time to wait and see.
Right. And I didn't realize, when Eileen was on, we talked about this too. I didn't realize how pervasive this program is nationally, because I hadn't really heard much about it until it came up in New Hampshire. And I saw last week on Facebook, George Lambert posted, we stomped it. We stomped the bill. But she told me, kind of gave me an idea of how much this is being used across the country.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. I didn't.
Well, and it actually goes to something we were talking about earlier. You want to test for marijuana intoxication? Have a reason to administer it, because somebody will come up with it.
Right.
If you want license plate scanners, have a reason to use license plate scanners, and a company will come up with license plate scanners for you.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that either one or both. I'm not making a value judgment or even comparing like the use of those two things, except that if the market demands a thing, guess what? Somebody's going to figure out a way to provide that thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just great. We learned to fly because people wanted to fly.
Right.
I mean, look at me. I don't look like I could become airborne, but we have the technology to get me airborne.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. What is your? We have a little bit of time left. What is the process of lobbying? People have these ideas of what a lobbyist does, how it works, and I think people, Norm, when he called, he kind of pointed toward the stigma that lobbyists have, and I think some of us have this idea. It's it's, at least in D.C., it's a lobbyist handing a politician an envelope full of money and here, vote for our cause. But what is it really? How does it really work? What is the process of lobbying?
So there are all kinds of lobbyists out there, and probably the ones that we think most about and hear most about are corporate lobbyists. These guys represent a particular industry or an industry association, sometimes a specific company, and they're paid a certain amount of money, and their job is to represent that economic interest, whatever it is, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry or a pharmaceutical company, whether it is the beer industry or Budweiser specifically, whether or not it is, all lawyers or trial lawyers, and while I don't always agree with what those lobbyists do, what they're doing is saying my job is to be an advocate for this group of people that is paying me money to be an advocate for them.
Sure.
So, and what they do is they look at all the legislation that's out there. They look at problems for their industry or for their clients. And occasionally they might propose legislation that would be beneficial to that industry or to those clients.
Sure.
So that's one type of lobbyist. Then you have lobbyists who are sort of special interest lobbyists. They're lobbying for, I guess you could call the NRA, this sort of thing. You could probably call Planned Parenthood. Along those two groups probably don't like to be compared to each other, but they both represent a certain set of interests.
And they're very powerful.
Exactly.
Lobbies,
Not necessarily a particular industry per se.
Right.
Although there are industries associated with both of those things, but it represents a particular set of interests that there are enough members in those organizations to hire lobbyists to do those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then there are people who lobby because there's a particular thing that they care about, and and some of those people are professional lobbyists, and some of them are not professional lobbyists. And by professional, I simply mean they accept money for doing this job. In our case, we accept money for doing this because otherwise there's no way we could pay to park in Concord several times a week and drive back and forth and
Sure.
eat in the cafeteria there underneath the State House because otherwise there's no way to get remunerated in any sort of way.
Right.
My wife would be happy to tell you I don't make a lot of money doing it. And there's some people who don't do it professionally, but that doesn't make them any less professional in their demeanor. They do it because it's very important to them, and because they're willing to spend that time and energy and their own money to champion a particular cause or issue. The process of lobbying, sometimes you help a representative or a senator introduce legislation. Sometimes someone will come to you and say, how do you feel about this bill? Or I think there should be a law about this. And if it's something that you're particularly well versed in, maybe you have a better idea about what's going on around the country, and you're able to say, well, there's a law like that over in Connecticut, and here's what it does, and here's the effect it had, and here's why we might want to do something like that, but not exactly in this way.
Right.
So sometimes it's kind of a consultative thing, although we don't get paid by reps. That would be illegal and wrong.
Right.
But sometimes people do come to us with those sorts of questions. Sometimes we help people who are, particularly in New Hampshire, where really we have citizen representatives and citizen senators. These guys, they're only paid a very small amount of money.
Right.
So sometimes we help educate them as to what the actual process is for introducing a bill and getting it through legislative services, and and how do you find sponsors and create amendments and things like that. So all of those things come into play.
Is there a lot of interaction with reps where you're basically almost a sales part of it, where you're trying to convince someone to see it your way, someone who tends not to see a particular issue your way? Are you trying to? Is there a lot of convincing that goes on? Or?
Sure. There's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that. A lot of that happens. Some of it happens one-on-one. More of it for me happens, in committees.
Okay.
When a bill comes before the committee, we go before the committee too, and we state our opinion and testify on the bill. So we're giving our opinion and we're trying to pitch our point of view, so to speak. So I guess you could compare it to doing sort of a salesy kind of thing, because we are certainly pitching an idea,
right?
So I guess for me at least, it's sort of a combination of educating and pitching.
Yeah.
One thing that I've certainly found in the time that I've spent in Concord is that a lot of folks, they lead busy lives. They've got jobs, they've got families, and when they show up those 2 or 3 days in Concord, a lot of them, they've read the bill, but they don't always have a context for the bill. And so, a big part of what I do is to try to say, this is what this bill means, and maybe you haven't thought about, as I mentioned earlier. Well, what we could talk about, I'm going to forget the number of the bill. There was a bill before the Ways and Means Committee yesterday on doing background checks for firearms. And without getting into the whole Second Amendment and gun thing or whatever like that, one feature of the bill was that it exempted law enforcement officers from complying with certain provisions in the bill. If you read the bill, it seems like, oh, well, I can understand why you do that, because law enforcement officers already undergo certain background checks and they do certain things.
Yeah.
However, the New Hampshire Constitution prohibits creating a privileged class of people in any one bill.
Okay.
So one of the things that I pointed out during that testimony is, if you're going to try to pass this bill, you have to take that provision out.
Yeah.
Because you're creating a privileged class, and you're not allowed to do that.
Right.
Which I think of as educational and helping them. Personally, I don't like the bill, but helping them get around a potential problem, because if they do that, then, and if the bill were to go all the way through the governor's office and get signed into law, then you're going to wind up with a court challenge. court challenges cost everybody time and money, to say nothing of the poor schmuck who got hauled into court in the first place.
Right.
So, and there were other problems with this bill that, it mentioned state certified ranges, which meant that if you and I were to go to some private land where it's perfectly safe to shoot, and the land were owned by either you or I could not hand you my pistol and say, "Hey, Matt, try this out,"
right,
unless I did a background check on you first.
Wow.
Because then I would be loaning you a gun,
right,
in a non-state sanctioned range to do that. So the bill was a bad bill for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
And I hope it doesn't pass, for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
But my point is that some of what we do there is to say this bill has flaws, it has problems. Whoever wrote it either didn't write it for New Hampshire.
Right.
It looked very boilerplate to me. But
Yeah.
whoever wrote it either didn't write it with the New Hampshire Constitution in mind, or didn't know the New Hampshire Constitution, or they simply honestly forgot that the New Hampshire Constitution has, these things
Right.
in
They
it.
don't know their Constitution.
So if you're going to try to pass it, you got to work on it first.
Right.
Or
Right.
it's or it's going to have a host of problems.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Kirk McNeil, thank you so much. This has been
Absolutely.
great. We're already out of time. It goes so quick. Kirk is from Rothbard, Sterner, and Dobbs. And before we go, so the website is rothbard-sterner-dobbs.com for people who want to keep up with what you're doing. And anything else you want to mention, too? Do you have a blog or any events coming up that you want to mention? Or
gosh. We need to update our website.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of a legislative session. Sometimes it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Feel free to check out our website. If there's something that's particularly bugging you that you'd like to see changed, feel free to send us a message about that.
Yeah.
We do like to get paid for what we do, but we also do what we do because we think we need to be doing it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. That's fantastic. Well, I commend what you're doing, and we'll have to have you back on again soon because
absolutely happy to do it.
There's always plenty going on to talk about. That's for sure. We'll see where this marijuana thing ends up.
Yeah,
You're more optimistic than I am, but you kind of have to be. It's your gig, You gotta you gotta keep pushing. So and that's awesome.
Exactly. If I'm the guy pushing it, I'm also the guy saying, I don't think it's going to happen.
I always say apathy is the greatest threat to our liberty. So.
I would say so.
Yeah.
When good men sit around and do nothing, nothing good happens.
Exactly. Well, thank you all for joining us this week on the Matt Connarton Unleashed Television Edition. Quick reminder, too, of course, Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Dr. Kevin Radio Network, we have the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed. So you can check that out tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, drkevinradionetwork.com, or you can go to ipmnation.com, which is right there on your screen, and that will get you there also. And I'll be back, of course, at 4 o'clock with Norm and at 6 o'clock with Gary. And Kirk, thanks again.
Thank you.
Talk at you all later. Bye, everybody.